Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. Ushering in April as we get set for plenty of sports chatter around these parts. Glad you stopped by to get all that you could ever handle, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And now that we're into the fourth month of the year, start of the second quarter, this is where the sports world will really start to take off, especially between now and we'll say right after the 4th of July. And even though baseball is going to carry us through the summer, but by the time we get to the end of June with the conclusion of the NBA playoffs as well as the Stanley Cup playoffs, and with the free agency that will follow suit right after that, squeezed in between the NHL and NBA draft, this is going to be a wonderful time. And to me, the best sports month of the year is right now. So let's uncover it. Let's get to it. And I'm going to start off with what's going to take place on Saturday in San Antonio as we have a Final Four to look forward to. And even though this has been a tournament to forget, let's just call it as we see it. And I talked about this a lot on Monday, and not to rehash everything that has transpired over the last 2 weekends, but it has certainly been one not to write home about when it comes to the NCAA tournament, and the madness has pretty much been sadness overall, except for a handful of games. But now we can push that aside, and let's get right to it. The two games, the first one will be Auburn and Florida, two teams that know one another, that played against each other this year, where Florida won at Auburn 90-81, and a lot of people are going to look at that contest as a barometer for the Gators to move on and play in a national championship. But of course, I'll say, not too fast. Even though Auburn, the number one seed overall, and well-deserved to be that considering how they played throughout the course of the year, but as we all know, that is a distant memory because it's all about this very moment. And the one big key in that game that's going to take place is the first one at 6:09. It's going to be the status of Johni Broome. And we all know that Broome is an All-American player. He's a guy that certainly the Gators are going to try to key on and make sure that their size and their physicality is going to do everything that they can to slow down Johni Broome, considering in his previous game against Michigan State, he had 25 points, 13 rebounds, although he had to leave with that elbow injury that right now it seems to be uncertain. We would think he's going to suit up. I mean, unless you have to amputate his arm off, there's no way that he's going to miss this game. But that is going to be a huge factor, knowing the status of Broome and how he's going to perform. Will Florida be extra physical with him just to use that as a tool to try to get him off his game? Because as we all know, at this stage of the tournament, it's not just about them being physical, but it's also a mental, emotional, even psychological advantage that they could have if they try to push him around, as they try to even swat at that arm and do whatever it takes to slow the big man down. So when you have Broome, who is a guy that, as we all know, could be their answer to the Florida Gators answer and Walter Clayton Jr., now we'll have to wait and see up until game time because it's a top secret. Haven't heard much about his injury. We know he's going to play. We would think that he's going to suit up and start come tip-off there, 6:09 Saturday evening. But we don't know how he's going to respond, how that's going to affect them, and will the Gators be extra physical toward Broome in order to, again, slow him down and not be that factor that could certainly turn the tables on this game to where Florida will have a big-time advantage. So that's the one thing I'm going to look at. And then, of course, when we take an even bigger look, I would think this is going to be a high-scoring game, even if Broome is not going to be 100% and not play up to his capabilities. Is that going to be a huge hit? Absolutely. But I would think Auburn, they're going to be flying high. They're going to be at an advantage in this regard, knowing that the Gators have come out slow in some of these contests, whether it was against UConn, and then, of course, what we saw there with Texas Tech. Maybe what they'll do is try to come flying out of the gate to the point where they'll have the Gators on their heels, and then they'll have to play from behind again. And as much as that could be advantageous to the Gators, but that could also be a curse at the same time. Because if they're down, let's say second half, 12 points with about 11 minutes to go, or even deeper than that, let's say it's a 5 minutes to go in the game and they're up by, let's say, a baker's dozen, will the Gators all of a sudden flick the switch and then turn on the Jets to the point where they could get the big-time scoring from Clayton and contributions from others in order for them to get to a point where they'll be that close or even ahead late in the game? Now, that's one thing that you don't want to have if you're the head coach, Todd Golden, of the Gators. You don't want to have to rely on that. You don't have to think that, all right, well, we could go to the well knowing that twice in this tournament we've been able to dig ourselves out and become victorious, because that is a game that you certainly do not want to play where you're going to be teetering at the brink of extinction here in this tournament. And in Auburn, of course, they're not going to, by any means, they're not going to lie down. They're going to, even despite the fact that Broome is going to be compromised here with his health, they are going to be a team that's going to just wreak havoc and try to match wits with the Florida Gators. And when we take a look at this, I think Florida is going to win this game. And this is prior to this matchup and the familiarity between both of these programs. So with Florida, I don't think that they can afford to fall behind. Not now, not at this juncture of the tournament. You're in the deep end of the pool with all 1 seeds that are left. And we understand, we talked about it on Monday, the last time that we had 4 number 1 seeds play in a Final Four was 2008. We know how that unfolded, Memphis, Kansas, etc. But I think Florida, with their size, physicality, and not knowing the status of Broome as we get to game time, tip-off, and then how that first 5-10 minutes are going to play out, I really think Florida is going to be, I'm not going to say preordained to make it into the national championship game, but I really truly believe that Florida, with the year that they've had, think about this, it's February 1st, they've only lost once, and that was to Georgia. So I don't think that this is going to be a scenario where all of a sudden they're going to take the pedal off the metal, that it's going to be a situation where the Gators all of a sudden, they're going to play, not necessarily laxed, but they're going to feel as if, don't worry, we got this game, or they're going to have that mentality that if they're down late, whether it's by 8, 10, 12, etc., I would think their head coach is going to hammer it home that we cannot play like that moving forward. Yes, we were able to survive against UConn. Yes, we were able to survive against Texas Tech, but now we're playing against pretty much their ilk. Other 1 seeds, whether they do advance against Auburn or if they meet Duke or Houston in the final. So I think Florida, I'm not going to predict the score. I would think the first to 80 is going to win. So I would think that the Gators will prevail in that regard. But I think Auburn's going to put up a fight. They're not going to lay down. I think it's going to be a close game, but I could see Florida pulling away late. Would I be shocked if Auburn wins? Absolutely not. But I like the Gators here. They've had such a tremendous year, and especially the last couple of months, they've just been on fire. And obviously with their escapability, pulling those Houdini acts is certainly going to bode well for them. Moving on, is that going to be beneficiary when, or is that going to be beneficial to them when they are going to be down late against a top squad similar to theirs? That's going to be dicey, and that's something that you don't want to risk. But at the same time, I think that is also going to be one that they have under their belt to know that, hey, we could go back into those reserves to know that we've been down this road before. We're not going to panic. Their head coach doesn't panic in those moments. So therefore, I think that is a huge plus for Florida come Saturday night. And then as far as the other game is concerned, Duke and Houston, now I'm going to root hard for the Cougars, but here's a game where I'm just going to put this in one big nutshell, and pretty much this is going to encapsulate how this game's going to go. In order for the Cougars to win, they have to hold Duke. 65 is the high end, but if they can hold them to 60, they'll have a good shot to win. If for whatever the reason they're going to play in the upper 60s to the 70s, I don't think they have a shot. We know Houston, defensively, they're going to be tenacious, they're going to be physical, and with Duke, who knows, they're more of a finesse team, but can they play in that half court to where they're going to be able to find those mismatches, they're going to be able to find those players that are going to cut to the basket. Obviously, Cooper Flagg's going to try to distribute as much as he can, and I'm sure a lot of the focal point is going to be to try to slow Flagg down. But when you have Tyrese Proctor and you also have Colin Kneppel, as well as the cast of characters that the Blue Devils have, I really feel that the Cougars are going to have to play in a phone booth in order for them to win this game. And Duke, we know they can spread it around, and we know the brilliance of Cooper Flagg. This is really going to be his time to shine, especially as we would expect he's going to go to the draft once the Final Four is complete. And for Duke, who has not been this deep in the tournament going back to 2015, and I believe that was the year that they beat Wisconsin that year, yes, so I would expect that Duke will make it to that next step and beat the Cougars. Now, Houston can, It's weird with them because just when you think that they're going to play the typical defense that they normally have, especially throughout the last few years, even dating back to 2021 when they went to a Final Four under their head coach Kelvin Sampson. But just when you expect for them maybe to not score, watch them go mano a mano with Duke. But we all know that that's not their game, and they cannot do that. So I would think that they're going to do whatever it takes to throw everything and the kitchen sink at Duke to slow them down, play in that muck, in the dirt, in the grime. If they play that game, that's where Duke could get into trouble. But that's going to be interesting for John Shire in this chess match to try to expose some of those defensive matchups and for them to be able to attack more so, I would think, not necessarily to play inside out, but to play the other way around, to try to go back and forth, to try to get those perimeter jumpers. And if they have a chance to get into the paint where their defense is going to have to play more on the perimeter, then they can expose Houston's defense from that regard. So how I see it here is that if Houston, one more time, they have to hold them under 65, but to me, 60 is the cap. I'm going to give them a 5-point difference only because if the game is 64-62 Houston, obviously they're in the game, let's say in the closing minutes. I think anything north of 65, that's trouble. And that's going to be hard because Duke has a lot of firepower, and it's certainly one of those situations where you have the unstoppable force and the immovable object. So I'm fascinated to see how this is going to shape up, but I really think at the end of the day, Duke will prevail and move on to play Florida in a championship game, which on Monday, CBS would do cartwheels and backflips, somersaults, etc. And how I look at it here is that they would want Florida Duke more than anything. And first off, they need to have Duke in the final game first and foremost. If Houston gets there, that's going to be, I hate to say it, that's going to burst a bubble for CBS. Because without Duke there, and even though Houston, I get it, they're a 1 seed and they would be deserving if they beat Duke fair and square, but it's not going to have a lot of sex appeal. Auburn, Houston, Florida, Houston, maybe Florida, Houston, they'd want to see that because they have a little bit more firepower than the Auburn Tigers. And that's not a knock on Bruce Pearl and company, but to me, Florida Duke is the creme de la creme and would certainly be a marquee matchup for both programs in that championship game. And I understand that we can look at how the games that they're on Saturday, I'm sure CBS, they're hoping for two, maybe classics will be strong, but two great games that either come down to the wire or come down at least to the final minute or minute and a half, where if there is some separation there late, but if there are a lot of lead changes and a lot of back and forth, CBS would sign for that. But they do not want to have a situation where, let's say, Florida ends up going away with about 5 minutes to go, where there's just no climax, there's just no intrigue or drama during those final 5 minutes. And the same for Duke. If Duke blows out Houston where they can't throw the ball into the ocean off a boat, and next thing you know, it's at the half, it's 42-28 Duke, you're going to think, oh, this game is over. So that's the last thing that they'd want, even though I'm sure that they would probably take one good game and one so-so game to have Florida and Duke in a championship game and for that to be a classic. So let's see how it shakes up or shakes down. And obviously we'll be all on top of this come Monday's podcast as we'll preview the championship game then. But I think this could be a fascinating couple of games here. I hope it is. The tournament needs it because, as I mentioned before, it has been a disaster. It has not been good. It has not been thrilling. You've had a couple of moments, but certainly not ones you can hang your hat on and say, oh, wow, you have about 5 or 6 games in this tournament which were lights out. You don't even have that. So we'll certainly keep our eyes on that as we move it along. But that is your college basketball. And yes, the game is on CBS, not TBS or TNT as years past. And I don't know if that's just a one-year thing. I don't know if that's a rotation where this year's on CBS and next year will be on TBS. But as it is, it'll be on regular network TV, which I'm sure the rating will be impacted a lot better than it would be on cable. And I understand with streaming and everything else, but still, having it on regular, free, local broadcast TV is certainly a lot better than trying to find it on your cable or streaming or whatever platform that you use to watch, whether it's DirecTV, Hulu, etc. All right, so now we'll stick with the basketball. Let me put on the high tops, or keep the high tops on, I should say, as they are already laced up, and see what's happening in the association. And now that we're literally 10 days away, a week from this Sunday will be the conclusion of the NBA season, and for what it's worth, there isn't a lot to really dive into. If you've listened to the podcast over the last few weeks, we know that the East is pretty much already set. And I understand you may argue whether Detroit, Indiana, and maybe Milwaukee, if they could somehow maybe get themselves in shape to the point where maybe they could get up to a 4 or 5 seed, or maybe they could even overtake the Pacers and get the home court in the first round. But here's the one thing. It doesn't matter whether you're 4 or 5, which you'll play the Cavaliers, or 3 and 6, which you'll play the Celtics. It looks like it could be a tough go once you get past this first round. And in the 7 through 10 range, I don't want to hear that the Heat have played well. They won, 6 in a row, and including beating the Celtics last night. And I get the Celtics didn't have Drew Holiday and Al Horford, Porzingis, etc. But the 7 through 10 range in the East is just a flat-out joke, and that I'll get into more when the play-in tournament, that will be 2 Mondays from, a week from this coming Monday, I should say, where I'll handicap the play-in scenario in both the East and West. And then out West, you have a situation where the Rockets, they have a 2-game and the lost 3-game lead over both the Lakers and Nuggets, which is huge because if you're Houston, you want to keep that 2 seed. That doesn't guarantee that you'll get to a conference final because you'll have the home court in the first 2 rounds, but at least whether or not you get the Lakers or T-Wolves as a right this second in a first round matchup, if they beat one another and then play Houston, where Houston will obviously have to wait to see whether or not who's going to come out of that 7-8 playing game. But Houston right now in the driver's seat and certainly have the pole position from the 2 seed. And obviously not the 1 because we know Oklahoma City has that, but they certainly do have everything in their stead, or everything as far as destiny controlling their own selves as far as getting that 2 seed. So unless they collapse here over the last 5 games, they should be locked in there. And then you have a situation where Lakers, Nuggets, Warriors, although Lakers and Nuggets are tied as far as them being with the same record. Let me make sure I got that right, because it says 17.5. Yeah, the Lakers actually have 2 games in hand. So therefore, the Lakers have the 3 seed, but they are both 3 games back of the Rockets for the 2 seed overall. But you have a scenario where the Lakers will probably end up being the 3, then the Nuggets, Golden State, which helps out because the first round, although that's going to be bad too, you don't want to see a Laker Warrior first round matchup, only because you know that one of those 2 teams are going to be gone. So that means no LeBron or Luka, or no Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler. But now, as you have it, if it's going to be Denver and Golden State, that means you may have no Jokic, Murray, and then have the same scenario that if the Nuggets do beat the Warriors, goodbye to Steph and Draymond as well as Jimmy Butler. But then you have the T-Wolves, who right now have the 6th seed. Now they're all tied with the same record, and this is where it's fascinating because you definitely want to be into the body of the Western Conference, meaning you want to be in that top 6. So for Minnesota, the Clippers, and the Memphis Grizzlies, who have been in a free fall, they all have the same record, 44-32. Golden State is 44-31, so they have a half-game edge at the 5 seed. So how that's going to play out is going to be huge because any one of those teams could overtake the other and become part of the 5-6 body of the Western Conference, as opposed to 7-8, where you have to play at least 1 game and maybe even 2 if you're the loser of that 7-8 game. So something to keep in mind there. And give it up for the Dallas Mavericks. What a job that they've done. And granted that they're probably going to be 1 and done. Maybe they'll win the 9-10 game and then play the loser of the 7-8 game. But with Anthony Davis having a monster game there last night, really his first full game where he's contributed and put up big-time numbers as they beat the Hawks there yesterday. But for a 34, 15, and 5 block performance, including the runner there in the closing seconds against the Hawks, that is going to be huge for the Maverick fan to see whether or not Davis, and now that they're getting healthy here, you have Daniel Gafford back. You also have Derek Lively back in his first game since he's been out since forever, I believe since January. So now that you have your bigs back, I understand no Kyrie, but maybe Klay Thompson, if he can get into a fountain of youth and get on a hot stretch here to where he could put his team into the big body as far as the top 8 in the Western Conference. And maybe they could surprise some people. Now, they're not going to get past the Oklahoma City Thunder, you would think, because they're just too depleted, despite the fact that they do have experience of what it takes, and they did beat the Oklahoma City Thunder last year. But if they do happen to meet in a 1-8 matchup, you know Oklahoma City, considering they were bounced by the Mavericks last year, that they're going to do whatever it takes to knock them out, probably in a clean sweep. But give it up, the Mavericks did not fold, the Mavericks did not shrink, and even with everything that has transpired over the last 2 months, and we know what has happened there in Dallas with the Luka trade, etc., they have certainly showed up here to their head coach there, Jason Kidd, and even to a certain extent with Nico Harrison, their GM, to show that they have had some pride and some fight, and kudos to them for at least being competitive and playing down the stretch to where they now have just a 1 and a loss, but 1.5 over the Sacramento Kings, and the Kings have lost 3 in a row. And then with Kevin Durant out, where the Phoenix Suns, after losing in Milwaukee, now they have to play the Celtics tomorrow in Boston and then play the Knicks on Sunday, which this road trip, not to say from hell, this 3-game road trip, but when they're playing the top teams in the Eastern Conference, maybe not the Bucks because they're currently 6th, but still, talent aside, we know that they're a very good team. The Suns look like they're going to fall short here, although they're 1 game back of the Sacramento Kings for that 10th seed. And that's what you pretty much have. I mean, other news and notes, am I going to get into the Ja Morant thing with the finger pointing that took place there in Golden State, or was that in Memphis, that game? I think it was in Memphis. And all he got was a warning, and he probably should have known better. And I think, who did Ja Morant get into it with at that point? I even forgot. And that just goes to show you how big a deal that is. Now, thankfully for the Grizzlies, considering that firing the head coach a week ago, and they've been mired in just a terrible stretch here where, as me, for fun, picking them as an over 45.5 and looking like that was a shoo-in about a month ago, and now I got to sweat bullets. All I got to do is go 2-4 down the stretch in order for me to get that, just to kind of sprinkle that in with the with the over-under total. It was Buddy Hield, that's who it was, where you got that little back and forth. So all I got was a slap on the wrist, just a warning. Not even a fine. So kudos to them for that. And then you had the altercation the other night between the Pistons and T-Wolves, where you saw Isaiah Stewart get 2 games, and then everybody else from Dante DiVincenzo to Naz Reid, among others, only got a 1-game suspension for that. Not many punches were thrown. Obviously, it was more of a wrestling match, and because it spilled into the crowd, that's where these players got the suspensions. And other than that, that's all I got really with the basketball. I'll talk about the schedule in a minute. A couple things to touch on. Congratulations to Carmelo Anthony. No surprise, as he's going to be inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame there in September. So no shock, 10-time All-Star. I believe he was a 6-time All-NBA player. One of the top 75 in the sport. So for Carmelo, congratulations to him. And then the 5th episode of Celtic City, if I could just talk about that for a quick second. I was a little bit disappointed. And this episode captured the 83-84 season with that epic NBA final, the best one that I've seen in my lifetime. And I understand people say, well, you're a Celtic fan, JAYREELZ. Of course you're going to say that. No, I remember that series as if it happened last week. 1984, Lakers-Celtics. Kareem had the migraines in game 1 where it didn't look like he was going to perform well, and he had a big game in that game 1 on a Sunday. And then it was interesting because they had 4 days off in between, so they didn't play game 2 until Thursday. And then you had the Gerald Henderson steal, which the Celtics were going to lose that game. They would have went to LA, down 2-0. And the Lakers were the better team that year, but they imploded in that game. They imploded in game 4 after the Lakers drubbed the Celtics 137-104. I'll never forget, that was a Sunday afternoon, and I couldn't believe how that game unfolded. One of the biggest blowouts in NBA Finals history at the time. And then you had the game 4, the physical game, where Kevin McHale clothesline Kurt Rambis, Kareem and Bird going at it, and the Celtics pulled out a big win there. Of course, the high temperature, the heat game in Boston Garden, where it was 110 on the court, and Bird was 15 for 20 from the field, had a monster game. And then, of course, they went back to LA, lost game 6 before winning game 7 in their building. And then, for whatever the reason, 84-85 was a little lackluster. I get it that you couldn't really get into a lot of things. I know you had the Bird-McHale, where McHale had the 56-point game, and then a week later, Bird had 60 in Tulane against the Hawks, where you had the Hawk bench just laughing and giggling and just animated there on the sideline, where Bird was just shooting from all areas of the court. And then we know what happened in 85. I know the Bird with the thumb, not healthy, whether or not that happened in a barroom brawl. Obviously, that is top secret for whatever the reason. Hasn't really been uncovered. Of course, Bird hasn't really divulged anything about that. But then 85 then turned into 86, and 86 obviously was their epic season, which would have been a great NBA final. It would have been the third go-around if Ralph Sampson didn't have that miraculous jumper. Granted that the Rockets were up 3-1 in that Western Conference final. But as we saw there in the NBA final, although the documentation of that year, as big as the Celtic team was then, and for them being one of the all-time great title teams in the history of the sport, and you could argue who's number one, who's number two, but they're definitely ranked, if not top 5, maybe even top 3. They didn't really massage or really go into that. Yes, they talked about Walton. Yes, they talked about a couple other things, but for some reason, I thought they could have expounded a little bit more. Maybe that's just me, and they even could have expounded a little bit on the Knick series in 84 against Bernard, which it went 7 games, and I get it was a conference semifinal, but it was Boston, New York. They talked about that in 73 when the Celtics lost to the Knicks in 73. First time they lost a Game 7 in their building. They could have actually went with that angle a little bit, and Bernard was on fire that year, and a lot of people thought Bernard should have been the MVP, and that was the first of Bird's 3 MVPs, which they did not mention, I might add, in the documentary. So that's why I was a little bit surprised by how they almost rushed after 84 through 85 and 86. And I get it. It's a 9-part series. They can't spend forever on it. But considering that's an iconic all-time team, it was almost like, all right, they made great music together. They showed their passing. They showed the versatility of this team, especially with Walton in the mix and with Cedric Maxwell being traded and all that for Walton. And it was a situation where it left a little bit more to be desired in my eyes. And then it ends with Len Bias, him getting drafted, but obviously not detailing his death and what transpired after that. That was the beginning of the demise of the Celtics, because even though 87 they went to a final, and then 88 they lost to the Pistons, and they had that rugged series against the Pistons before, and you know you're going to hear about the Isaiah Thomas, Dennis Rodman theory of if Larry Bird was black, he'd just be a normal black player, but of course he's white, he's exalted, and of course bow at the altar of the Great White Hope. But anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. So definitely watch it. I'm not saying to pass on it, but to me, the 5th episode, I was just a little bit disappointed by that. And as far as the schedule coming for the NBA this forthcoming weekend, tonight, and games that matter, people. Minnesota at Brooklyn, only because Minnesota is in that 4 quad of the race between the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th seeds in the Western Conference. Memphis at Miami. Golden State at LA, so your TNT doubleheader is Memphis at Miami and Golden State at the Lakers. Tomorrow, Phoenix at Boston, as I mentioned. Oklahoma City at Houston. Denver, Golden State. Phoenix, Boston, and Denver, Golden State are NBA TV games, not ESPN games. Dallas at the Clippers. Saturday, you have Memphis at Detroit, good game. Milwaukee at Miami, Dallas at the Clippers. So they're doing a back-to-back there for the Mavs out in LA. And then Sunday, no ABC games, surprisingly, but I guess you have the women's Final Four, and that's the reason why those games are on NBA TV, because you have the women's Final Four in college basketball tomorrow and Sunday. So keep that in mind. And go South Carolina Gamecocks. I do not want to see Gino Auriemma win another national title. That's just me. And of course, they only beat USC, that being the Trojans, because of no Juju Watkins to get to a Final Four. Had to throw that in there as well. Sunday, Lakers at Oklahoma City. NBA TV have a quadruple header there. Chicago at Charlotte at 1. Don't bother. Lakers at Thunder, followed by Sacramento at Cleveland. Houston at Golden State. So you got 4 games on NBA TV. And then you have Knicks, Suns at the Garden. Indiana at Denver. Not a bad game. And that pretty much wraps up your NBA schedule there from now through the weekend. Now let me lace up the skates to go through the National Hockey League. And pretty much the same as the NHL, or NBA, excuse me. 2 weeks from tonight is the conclusion of the regular season. And there isn't a lot of drama when it comes to the divisions, other than the Atlantic and the Florida Panthers taking a little bit of a hit here. They lost to the Maple Leafs there last night. Now, good news is on the horizon where Matthew Tkachuk will probably be back for round 1 of the playoffs. Who knows if that's game 1, 2, 3, or 4. but it looks like that his progress is doing well. He's probably going to make a return sometime in round 1, and that's good news. Now he's going to have to get back in game shape because ever since the Four Nations face-off, he has not played since then, and who knows? I'm sure he's keeping himself in great shape, but he's not going to be in hockey game shape. So that's something just to keep in mind as we get deeper into the month and once the playoffs begin, which we'll believe, I think April 20th is the start of the postseason. So as I pull up the NHL page here, JAYREELZ. So for the Panthers, right now, they are currently 4 points back of the Maple Leafs, and they have a 3-point lead over the Lightning. And I don't think it matters, but it certainly would help if the Panthers had the home ice in the first round. Now, remember, they played Tampa last year in the first round, and they beat them in 5 games, but they had the home ice. But Tampa, a lot different team this year than last. And that's going to be a battle first round. I don't think that would be a 5-game series. That could be probably 6, maybe even 7. So something to keep in mind there. And the Lightning do have a game in hand on the Panthers. So right now with the Panthers losing 3 in a row and with both Toronto and Tampa on current 3- and 4-game winning streaks respectively, you got to wonder whether or not, and I talked about this on Monday, whether or not the Panthers would be the best team at the start of the postseason, even with Toronto, Tampa, and even the Capitals ahead of them. But now they've been in a little bit of a lull, so something to keep in mind here as we get down the stretch of the season, whether or not they go into the playoffs on a bit of a high note, or are they going to skid into the postseason and maybe have a first-round series that could go to distance. So just have to put that in the back of your mental Rolodex. But besides that, there really isn't much to go on. And as far as the wild cards in both conferences, to me, the West right now is looking like a foregone conclusion that you're going to have Minnesota and St. Louis there as your 2 wildcard seeds because the divisions, all right, Dallas is 4 points behind the Winnipeg Jets, and they do have a game in hand, but I think the Jets will hang on and survive there, despite the fact that the Stars have won 6 in a row and are playing and peaking at the right time. And then out west, Vegas has a 5-point lead on Edmonton, on the Kings, 5 on the Kings, 7 on the Oilers. Let me get it straight here as I reel it in. So the divisions, other than the Atlantic, nothing really to write home about. And as far as the wild card situation goes, you have in the East, you have Ottawa and Montreal. Ottawa has a 5-point lead. They'll be fine with 8 games to go. Montreal tied with the Rangers, but with a game in hand, they have the upper hand there and the second wild card spot in the East. Then you have the Rangers at 79, Columbus at 77, and Detroit at 75. Should I even throw in the Islanders? They've lost 6 in a row, and they've just been flaming out here. But I guess you have to keep them in there. And even Patrick Roy, the coach, called out Anthony Duclair, saying that he has to get his head out of his rear end. And he didn't use those words, but certainly called him out in the postgame there the other night against the Wild. And who knows how this is going to end with the Islanders this season, and even with the front office. Does Lou Lamoriello step down? Is Raw going to survive this thing? Who knows? But it's certainly been a mess there on the island the last couple of years, as they look like they're not even going to qualify for the playoffs. So we'll have to wait and see there. And they have a tough schedule. They have to play the Rangers. They still have to play the Capitals 2 times. And who knows? The Capitals have everything wrapped up, you would think. And right now, even with the Maple Leafs 9 points behind the top spot, but you don't think that the Maple Leafs are going to catch them. And of course, I'll get to the Capitals in a second. But that is the wild card in the East. And out West, you have the Flames currently 7 points behind the Blues and Wild. And the Blues have won 10 in a row here. So I don't know if they're going to slow down. And if they do, they probably don't want to. They want to just ride the stretch into the latter part of the month once the playoffs begin. But Calgary, 7 points, and Vancouver, 8 points behind. Right now, they're looking like distant and long shots to get even that close, let alone even qualify for the postseason. So just like the NBA, not a lot of hype, not a lot of intrigue with these races. All right, maybe the Atlantic to see who's going to come out on top there, and it'll be a 2-seed overall, and who's going to host that first-round series between, right now, we would think, the Florida teams, between the Panthers and Lightning. And then, other than that, that's it. I know the wild card, all right, it's a little bit of a jumbled mess. Who's going to prevail from that, whether it be the Rangers, Columbus, Detroit, or will Montreal stand pat? We'll have to wait and see. But that's all you got with the National Hockey League. Similar to the NBA, where the East is pretty much a formality, and the West, all right, we know the middle of that bracket is interesting. But other than that, that's it. And the NHL, the same. I'm sure they just want to get to the finish line and get these postseason started. So let's see what's going to happen there. And then the Capitals, who lost last night to the Carolina Hurricanes, but Alex Ovechkin now at 892 all-time on the goal-scoring list and is a hat trick away. So now these games, and I'll look at the schedule in a moment, I would think the networks, that being ESPN, ABC, even the TNT, TBS, all those networks, I don't know if they're going to show these games because Ovechkin, although he's about to do something that nobody ever imagined when Wayne Gretzky retired, and here he is 3 goals away, and he could do it in the next game. All he needs is a hat trick. So with 7 to go, you would think this is a shoo-in. Now, I said this for weeks on end, and I know nobody else is talking about this, maybe on other hockey podcasts or other entities, whether it be podcasts, radio shows, whatever. But I've been talking about this for months, and I'm not trying to pump my chest out to say that. But my thing is that will there be any airplay, let's just say if he's 1 goal away? Will the network say, we're going to have to show this? Granted that there's just a handful of hockey fans, and I know that's not trying to diss the hockey fan, but it's not as if this is a home run chase in baseball. Or this isn't a situation, NFL, everybody's watching football. And even in the NBA, when LeBron scored the 38,000, whatever it was, to beat Kareem, at least they had that on TNT. Will the NHL do the same? They have to. This is a guy, and this is a moment that you're probably never ever going to see. So kudos to Ovechkin and what he's done coming off of that broken leg. But let's face it, if you're ESPN, ABC, TNT, TBS, show this game. Don't leave this on the NHL network. Don't leave this for the local broadcast to take hold of it. This is your time to promote your sport. And I don't care if he's from Russia. I don't care if he's from the moon. This guy's about to do something that only one other person in the sport, and everybody thinks, hands down, the greatest player ever. And I understand in certain fractions you're going to look at Gordie Howe, or maybe even Bobby Orr for that matter, but it's Wayne Gretzky and it's everybody else. And now, 2 goals away from getting to near the top of Mount Gretzky, and then for him to get that 3rd goal, he'll be on it alone. And it'll be Mount Ovechkin. So NHL, what are you going to do? You better put up or shut up, and chances are you're probably going to shut up because you're not going to deliver that game, whether it be, let's go to the schedule now. Washington tonight, no game. No game tomorrow. All right. Oh, wait. All right, now this is loading. All right, so they're playing, funny enough, they're playing against the Islanders on Sunday, but why isn't this loading properly? This is what happens when you're recording this. All right, let's start over here. Capitals are playing the Blackhawks at home tomorrow, and then they go to the Island on Sunday, and that game is on TNT. The game tomorrow is on the NHL Network. All right, so he's 3 behind. He could get a hat trick tomorrow against the Blackhawks, and we know the Blackhawks are the dregs of the league. Now, I think what they're hoping for is maybe he gets a goal against the Blackhawks, maybe 2, and then on TNT Sunday, if he's a goal or 2 behind, maybe he'll do it against the Islanders. So we'll see what's going to happen there, but those are the 2 games that the Capitals have heading into the weekend to see whether or not that he'll either match or eclipse the Great One's all-time record. So we'll certainly keep an eye on that. And as far as the rest of the schedule, Boston at Montreal, only because of the Canadiens and where they're at. Tampa at Ottawa, good game there. Colorado, Columbus. Pittsburgh at St. Louis, only because St. Louis going for 11 in a row. Nashville, Dallas. Winnipeg at Vegas, the top 2 teams out west. And then tomorrow, Minnesota at the Islanders. Did I get that mixed up with Duclair? I got my teams all mixed up when I talked about Duclair against the Wild. They're actually playing them tomorrow. The game that Duclair, and this is me being a jumble mess, was against Tampa. That's when it was. So for whatever the reason, I had the Wild on the brain. And we all know that the Islanders lost back-to-back to the Lightning Sunday and Tuesday on that home and home. And that's where Roy got in Duclair's backside. So Minnesota, New York, then ESPN, ABC, Rangers, Devils, followed by Pittsburgh, Dallas in the afternoon. Edmonton at the Kings, big game there for to see who gets that 2 seed in the Pacific to host a first-round series. Carolina, Boston, Colorado, St. Louis, Winnipeg, Utah, and then Sunday, as I mentioned, Capitals, Islanders, Dallas, Minnesota. Actually, a tripleheader, Florida, Detroit for TNT and Max. And then at night, nothing really to Vegas at Vancouver. And that is your NHL for the weekend. All right, now I'm going to turn my attention again to batter's box for baseball and then NFL before I close it out. With the baseball, it's 1 week in, and the Dodgers are now 155 wins away from a perfect season. They swept the Cubs in Japan. They swept the Tigers over the weekend, and then they swept the Atlanta Braves, which is twofold because I'm going to talk about them next. The Dodgers are now 7-0, and they did it last night in walk-off fashion. They were down 5-0 in the game to the Braves, and you thought, all right, well, now this is where the Dodgers are going to lose, but they chipped away. They came from behind. They tied the game at 5, and then in the bottom of the ninth, Shohei Ohtani goes opposite field, 6-5, Dodger Stadium in a frenzy, 7-0. They keep their perfect record intact. Historic because they have not been, as a matter of fact, I take that back, they're 8-0. So let me get my facts straight here. What is going on, JAYREELZ? So 8-0, they won the 2 in Japan, 3 against Detroit, 3 against the Braves. 8-0 to start the season, so now they're 154 wins away from a perfect season. So now you have a situation where the Dodgers, flying high, no World Series hangover whatsoever, and this is a team, as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, check those receipts. Is this team going to be a juggernaut, or are they going to sleepwalk through this regular season? Well, right now, they're looking like a juggernaut. And I get it when they get to the middle of July and August, and maybe Mookie Betts is on the IL, and Freeman is on the IL, and a couple of pitchers are also on the shelf, where they're going to be going through the motions, and maybe they'll lose for them, and this would be the sky's falling, losing back-to-back series where they lost 2 out of 3, whether it be in Pittsburgh and in St. Louis, or who knows, I just threw Pittsburgh out there. But yes, they may have a stretch where they'll lose back-to-back series, where what's happening with the Dodgers, but all is right in La La Land as they just continue to mash and continue to pitch well, and here they are now at 8-0. And then the flip side of that are the Braves. Braves are the only winless team in the sport. They start their season 0-7, losing 4 in San Diego and now 3 in LA before they come home, day off today. Now they will host the Miami Marlins, who at this very moment, the Marlins have a 3.5 game lead in the division over them, as they have a 4-3 record. They lost 2 out of 3 to the Mets, and even yesterday they may have got robbed of a victory because there was a play at the plate where it looked like, I think that was Xavier Edwards who slid in right there, bang bang play, the tag there by Luis Torrens. It looked like he was safe, and although it was close, but they called him out, which would have been the go-ahead run there in the bottom of the 8th inning, I believe that was. And the Marlins were unable to get the equalizer. This was after Pete Alonso had a 3-run home in the top of the 8th to tie the game. So that play happened, bottom of the 8th. They didn't get the run, and then it went into extras before the Mets won 6-5 and took 2 out of 3 in Miami. And now they have the home opener tomorrow against the Blue Jays. But for the Braves, now they have to rally the troops. I'm sure this day off will help before the Marlins come to town, and I'm sure they're going to get their first win over the weekend. I'd be shocked if I'm here on Monday and the Braves are 0-10. And if that's the case, it could be a long year because we've seen teams get off to these slow starts. Mets last year 0-5. We know what happened to them. But the Braves, and I think they'll be fine in the grand scheme of things. But right, they don't want to start off their season. Let's say they lose 2 out of 3 to the Marlins and they're 1-9. So they're going to need 2 out of 3, maybe even a sweep just to make themselves even feel that much more better. And even though 3-7 is still bad, but certainly it's a lot better than 0-10, which I don't think is going to happen, or 1-9, which could happen, but I can't see that. So you have that to chew on there if you're a Brave fan trying to get your first win in this 2025 season. But then let's go back to the NL West. You have the Padres who start off 7-0, sweeping the Braves, and they also sweep the Cleveland Guardians. So they look at the Dodgers as if, all right, well, you're 8-0, but we're just literally a half game behind you in the standings, and we're perfect as well. Now, the Padres, tremendous start. Can't knock what they've done, and a lot of people thought that the Padres were going to be a team that will make it to the postseason, will have a big year similar to last year. Now, they had a torrid second half. Remember, they had a very slow first half in order for them to get to the point where they clinched, qualified, and then they lost to the Dodgers after sweeping the Braves in the wild card round. But for San Diego, right now it's eyeball to eyeball with the Dodgers, even though they have to get on their tippy toes because the Dodgers at 8-0 and the Padres 7-0. But give it up. Padres a tremendous start and certainly neck and neck there with the world champion Dodgers. So who knows? Is this going to be a situation where this is going to be a battle all summer long? Way too early to tell. I would think the Dodgers will have some separation. Maybe the Padres, who knows? If the Dodgers have a hiccup here and the Padres continue to mow the opposition, and we'll look at the schedule in a second, maybe it's a situation where, the Padres, could they be in first place by the time we reconvene on Monday? Quite possibly. So let's look at the schedule in its entirety here. We have some games there today, some series that are closing out. Yankees looking to avoid a sweep at the hands of the Diamondbacks. So after that 3-0 start and the torpedo bats, which I don't know, much to do about nothing. Let's see if the Yankees could avoid a sweep there at the hands of the D-backs. And they don't want to go on the road at 500 considering their start. But for today's games, schedule please. Here we go. Boston, Baltimore to wrap up their series. Colorado, Philadelphia, Houston, Minnesota. And you have the Reds and Brewers wrapping up there. Let me just make sure. Yeah, that's a 4-game series with the Reds and Brewers because, right, Kansas City played the Milwaukee Brewers there at the start of the week. And the Brewers, at least, respectable. They were 2-1, won 2 out of 3 against the Royals there. And then as far as the Red Sox, I know Rafael Devers has been on a strikeout tear, which hopefully will come to an end. They're playing the rubber match of their game, I believe, right now. Yeah, the Red Sox are up 2-1. So we'll keep an eye on that. And they also had a couple of signings there where the Red Sox were able to sign one of their young players to an 8-year, $60 million contract, the second baseman, Christian Campbell. You also had Garrett Crochet. For a guy that only has, 200 and some odd innings under his belt, he got the big payday, 6 years and $170 million. Obviously a young left-hander, solid arm, spectacular at times. So he knew the Red Sox were going to fork over the money, which I believe he was going to be a free agent after next year. So obviously they got his payday there. And then Ketel Marte, here are the Diamondbacks as they close out their series against the Yanks. Also signed a big deal, maybe not as big as the aforementioned, but 6 years, $115 million as he'll stay in the desert there. And Ketel Marte, who was third in the MVP voting last year in the National League, so he gets his big-time payday. But as far as the schedule over the weekend, you have the Cardinals in Boston. Obviously, 2 old-time teams, as you know, playing in a bunch of World Series dating back to the 40s. San Diego's going to Chicago to play the Cubs, so we'll see if their streak will continue in the Windy City. The Dodgers are playing in Philadelphia, so that is a marquee matchup there of 2 powerhouses in the National League. So let's see if the Dodgers, 8-0, can they continue this stretch here? And the Phillies currently lead in the NL East as of right this very moment, so that is going to be a fascinating series. And surprising that the Sunday night game is St. Louis-Boston. You would think that would be Dodgers-Phillies written all over it, and I guess because of the 2 old-time teams. But the Cardinals, although they're off to a very good start, got to give it up to them. Remember, they started their season sweeping the Minnesota Twins, but they were only able to get 1 win against the Angels, and the Angels have been a surprise here in this first week of the season, as I'll go through the standings in a second. But surprised that you don't see LA-Philly as the Sunday night game, but you do have St. Louis and Boston for the traditionalist and the one who's going to go back in time with those 2 organizations. Then you have the Yankees playing in Pittsburgh, but no Paul Skeens as he pitched there yesterday. Arizona will go to Washington after their game against the Yankees today. Baltimore and Kansas City, good matchup there. Tampa Bay at Texas. Reds and Milwaukee to play the Brewers. And then the Guardians will play the Angels there, which pretty much rounds out your schedule. A's will play in Colorado, Chicago, Detroit. And then with the standings real quick, yeah, they've been a bit of a surprise. How about the Blue Jays 5-2 off to a tremendous start? And them coming off of the heels of a sweep over the Nationals after winning 2 out of 3 in Baltimore. Rays with the 2 homestands, good for them. Beating Colorado and Pittsburgh, winning 4 out of 6. The Central, right now, all teams are 2-4. Could you imagine? All the same record, and all 2 games under 500. So that's what you have there in the Central. Rangers, no surprise, 5-2. The Angels, 4-2, good start for them. Astros, after winning 2 out of 3 against the Mets, they get broomed by the Giants at home. And we know they haven't been a great home team over the last couple of years. And then, like I mentioned, Phillies 4-1, Marlins 4-3, Mets at 500. Nationals off to a slow start. We know about the Braves. Cubs 5-4, good start for them. Cards 4-2, as we mentioned. And then out west, we know what's happening there. Giants a 5-1 start. Diamondbacks very competitive. NL West, as we would expect. So that is your baseball. And then to wrap it up here with the NFL, as I put on the helmet and shoulder pads. The NFL draft 3 weeks from today, but I don't want to talk about that. The new rules implemented in the National Football League with the overtime and the kickoff. Now, the overtime, both teams are going to get the ball. So it's not a situation where if the team that wins the coin toss and they go down the length of the field and punch it in the end zone, the game is over. No, the other team will get the ball, but here's where I'm puzzled with both of these rules. Number one, with the kickoff, let's say if a team methodically goes down the field and it's a 10-minute overtime. They didn't increase it back to 15 minutes. So let's say a team goes down the length of the field and it's an 8.5-minute drive. And next thing you know, it's 1st and goal and they want to eat the clock and try to punch it in the end zone, or worse, try to kick a field goal with literally seconds left. So you mean to tell me that, let's say there's 15 seconds left, they kick a field goal, let's say get a touchdown. So now there's only 15 seconds for the team that's going to get the ball for them to do any damage? They have to get it back to 15 minutes. And that's going to lead to the other thing as far as player safety, because people are going to say, oh, well, or the league will say, well, no, we're concerned about the player's health. We want to make sure that it's 10 minutes. We don't want them playing an extra overtime or full old school overtime. Well, what's going to happen here if you're going to have a team that's going to have the ball for 8 minutes, 45 seconds, or 9 plus minutes? Then they're only going to have a minute 15 seconds, or even less than that to get the ball, to see if they have to go down the length of the field to maybe have to punch it in the end zone. So they're going to have to ratify that in some way, shape, or form. And then with the kickoffs, oh, well, player safety. Well, now if you kick it in the end zone, they're going to spot the ball at the 35-yard line, which they're encouraging more returns. And I get it that once the returner possesses the ball, that's when in essence, the play begins. That's when the teams now the team that's kicking off, they'll go down and try their assault, for lack of a better word, on the returner. But now you're going to have a situation where if you put it in the end zone, ball's at the 35. Maybe if you take and encouraging returns, well, maybe if you put the kicker at the 30 or even a 25, and you could eradicate that whole situation where you don't have to put the ball on the 30-yard line. Why not do that? Because you don't want to have teams start at the 35-yard line, so that means you're going to have pooch kicks or shorter kicks or not try to boot it through the uprights. And who knows, maybe some teams will be like, oh, what the hell, we'll just boot it through the uprights altogether. And I get it. They want to have the play of the return involved. It's thrilling, it's exciting, etc. But what about player safety? So they contradict themselves with that. So, all right, we're going to have to wait and see in the preseason how this is going to work, whether or not teams are going to try to kick to the 5 or maybe to the goal line and not go into the end zone, and then have a situation where the ball's at the 35 where literally, let's just say, for instance, if the team kicks a field goal at 20-17 late in the game and it's 2.5 minutes to go and the other team has 2 timeouts, well, you can't even kick the ball through the end zone because they're going to hit the ball to 35 where 2 plays after that, they're going to be in field goal range. So, to me, it's a weird rule. Either have it as it is, have the ball to 30, and move the kickoff from the 30-yard line to the 20, where it used to be back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, or if you want to move it to the 25, fine. Do that, and then you'll still have players return kicks, as opposed to doing it the other way around. I don't get it. So, that's the NFL for you. And to me, not a fan of either one of those rules. I do like it that both teams will possess it, but have a full overtime. Oh, but we have to have player safety. All right, so then why are you moving the kickoff if it goes in the end zone? Now you're going to spot them at the 35, where you want to have teams run the ball from the goal line or from the 5 or whatever. To me, it's just a jumbled mess. But anyway, that's the NFL for you. 2 other quickies. Jimmy Haslem, the owner of the Browns, he even admitted by saying we took a big swing and miss on Deshaun Watson. So Is that a thing where you read between the lines? Will they draft, and here I am talking about the draft, but this will be brief, I promise. Will they draft Shedeur Sanders as they had the 2-pick overall in the draft? Now, we understand they owed a boatload of money to Deshaun Watson. He has 2 more years guaranteed, etc. But the big swing and miss, is that a hint, hint, wink, wink, to think that Shedeur Sanders could be a player here being drafted number 2 overall? That we'll have to wait and see. I don't think that will be the case. I think they'll go ahead. They're going to have to do something with Watson. They just can't cut him because all the money that they have to deal with the cap and just the disaster of that trade and how it's played out there in Cleveland. But I would think that Kenny Pickett, he may not be the answer, but they did bring him in. They could still sign Joe Flacco, who was a part of the Browns a couple of years ago, as the stopgap. And then maybe after next year, you get rid of Deshaun Watson and cut bait at that time. But that's what you have there with the Browns, as they've been just a flat-out train wreck. And we'll see what's going to happen there as we get closer to the draft, whether or not Sanders is on their radar. And then lastly, Calais Campbell, I got to give it up to him. Signs with the Arizona Cardinals, the team that drafted him, and I believe played the first 8 years of his career, going on his 18th year as a defensive lineman. Back to Arizona. To you, and he's one of the great guys in the NFL on top of all that. So congrats to you, my G. Good for you, as I'm sure career coming full circle. And I would think, who knows, the guy's bionic, probably his last season in the National Football League. That'll do it, my good people. Another episode just about in the books. As always, thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the wonderful world of sports. And if you haven't done so, people, I don't know what you're waiting for. Please subscribe, rate, review, Apple, Spotify, the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ. I'm trying to get to 600. I'm at 595 right now subscribers. 600, not 600,000. One day with the Lord and the podcast God's will to get to that point. And for those who love sports, like sports, the casual sports fan, the diehard, the kook like yours truly, please pass it along. Take a screenshot. Send it to me on social media. Share it with everybody. Tell a friend to tell a friend. Please, people, as an independent content creator, podcaster that I am, trying to blaze a path and a trail in this business, I need all the help that I can get as I'm trying to get the passive income, the sponsors, etc. So your participation is vital for the growth and the expansion of what I do. So please, if you could do that, I would sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, thank you and gratefully appreciate it. And if you want to hit me up with a question, comment, or suggestion, you can do so at the following. Of course, on YouTube, at JAYREELZ, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, Twitter, JAYREELZ1, just the number, or the old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. In the blood, in the DNA. This is why I quit my full-time job to pursue this full-time. And I haven't missed a beat, I haven't skipped a beat, and every so often, people may think, oh, JAYREELZ, is he going to take a break? No, because again, if this is my passion, this is what it is that I love to do, I hope that you're able to hear it into this microphone through your earbud speakers, headphones, or tablet, laptop, phone, etc. Because as long as I'm sitting in front of this camera, I will continue to deliver nothing but passion, fire, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South End, the South Pacific, and all points beyond. Peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.